When my sister faced the judge, she didn't hesitate. She didn't glance at me once. She just smiled and said, "Your Honor, I'm relieved this is finally over. What belongs to me is coming home." Behind her, my parents began clapping. Not politely, not awkwardly, real applause. The kind people give when they think the ending is already written. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment like this. Your like and share can carry this story to someone who needs hope, healing, or strength today. Red heart. I stood alone at the defense table, fingers locked together, so tightly my nails cut into my palms. The room felt tilted, like gravity had shifted, and I was the only one still trying to stand upright. To everyone watching, I probably looked exactly like they expected me to. Quiet, passive, cornered. My sister's smile widened. What no one noticed was the judge's face. She stopped reading. Her pen hovered in midair, frozen. Then she looked up, not at my sister, not at her lawyer, but directly at me. "Ms. Rowan," she said calmly, "before I issue any ruling, I need to ask you something." That was when my sister's expression cracked, just slightly, enough to tell me the story they'd rehearsed was about to fall apart. My name is Elena Rowan, and long before we ever stepped into that courtroom, my family had already decided who I was allowed to be. My older sister, Maribel, was certainty wrapped in confidence. She spoke fast, laughed loud, and never asked permission. She assumed it was already hers. My parents loved that about her. They called it strength, leadership, drive. When Maribel entered a room, people adjusted. When I did, they barely noticed. At holidays, my mother would beam and say, "This is Maribel. She's so capable." Then, almost as an afterthought, "And this is Elena. She's dependable." Dependable. That was the word they used when there was nothing exciting to say. I learned early that resistance only made things worse. If Maribel interrupted me, I was told to be patient. If she borrowed something without asking, I was told to share. If I protested, softly, carefully, the temperature in the room dropped. "Why are you always making things difficult?" my father would ask. So I stopped. Silence became my safest skill. Years later, when my aunt passed away, she left me something small but meaningful. Her struggling bookkeeping firm. It wasn't glamorous, just a modest client list, a rented office, and a reputation built on trust. She told me once, "You notice details other people ignore. That's why I trust you." I took over quietly. I rebuilt the systems, updated the records, paid off lingering debts. I didn't ask my family for help. Maribel laughed when she found out. "A bookkeeping firm?" she said over dinner. "What are you going to do with that?" "Count pennies forever." "I'm expanding it," I replied. My parents exchanged looks. "That sounds like a lot for you." My mother said, "Wouldn't it be smarter to let Maribel help manage things?" There it was again, the assumption that I couldn't. So I worked harder. Late nights, weekends, online certifications, slow, careful growth. And when the firm finally became profitable, when it had real contracts, real credit, real value, that's when everything changed. Maribel called me one evening, her voice syrup-sweet in a way that made my stomach tighten. "You know," she said, "Mom and Dad think it's unfair that you're running everything alone." "It's my business," I said evenly. She laughed. "We'll see." 2 weeks later, my phone exploded with alerts. Credit inquiries, account changes, a loan application I had never submitted, approved in my name. I sat on my couch, heart pounding, scrolling through transactions that didn't belong to me, a commercial vehicle registered under my business, a lease agreement, thousands of dollars in debt, all under my identity, and the signature, mine. perfectly replicated. The court filing arrived days later. Maribel Rowan versus Elena Rowan. She was claiming joint ownership of the firm, citing an alleged verbal agreement and shared operational responsibility. Attached were statements from my parents, witnesses. They didn't hesitate. That hurt more than the fraud. I called my mother. Elena, she said immediately, already defensive, this doesn't need to turn ugly. What did she do? I asked. She helped you? My father cut in. You wouldn't have grown that business without her. She used my identity, I said. She was protecting you. He snapped. You get overwhelmed. The call ended there. The hearing came fast. Too fast. When I walked into the courthouse, Maribel was already seated between our parents, polished and calm, like this was a formality. She leaned toward me as I passed. Don't worry, she whispered. I'll take care of everything. I sat alone. No family behind me. No support. Just the understanding that this wasn't about sharing anymore. This was about erasing me. Her lawyer spoke first. He didn't accuse. He sympathized. He talked about my long hours, my independence, my reluctance to involve family. He framed discipline as isolation, care as control. Ms. Rowan, he said smoothly, has struggled under pressure. Maribel nodded. Then came the line that made my chest tighten. It was during this vulnerable period that she agreed to let her sister handle financial logistics. Handle, not own, not steal, just handle. The judge listened. Maribel stood next, voice soft, concerned. I love my sister, she said. She panics. She doubts herself. I just stepped in when she needed help. My parents said nothing. I said nothing because I wasn't waiting for permission to speak. I was waiting for them to finish telling a story that couldn't survive daylight. And when the judge finally looked at me, I knew the unraveling had already begun. The judge's question hung in the air longer than it should have. Ms. Rowan, she said again, steady and precise, you've been very quiet today. Every head in the courtroom turned. Maribel's lips curved into a thin smile, the kind she used when she thought silence meant weakness. The kind she'd worn my entire life whenever adults asked why I wasn't more like her. I need clarity, the judge continued. She held up one document, this claim of shared operational responsibility. When exactly did that begin? Maribel's lawyer didn't hesitate. Late spring of last year, Your Honor, during a private discussion between the sisters. The judge nodded once, then looked directly at me. Ms. Rowan, she asked, do you recall such a conversation? Yes, I said. Maribel's smile widened, and the judge asked carefully, do you recall authorizing your sister to apply for loans, register assets, and sign contracts on your behalf? No, I replied. One word. Clean. Firm. The smile vanished. The judge didn't react immediately. She wrote something down, slowly. You mentioned feeling overwhelmed during that time. She said, can you explain what you meant? I chose my words with care. I was overwhelmed by growth. I said, by running a business alone. Not by confusion. Not by incapacity. Maribel shifted in her seat. The judge flipped to another page. Yet these documents suggest you knowingly transferred financial authority. She paused. Ms. Rowan, she said to Maribel, if this was a shared business, where is your financial contribution? Maribel opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her lawyer stepped in quickly. The agreement was informal, Your Honor, based on trust, family understanding. The judge raised an eyebrow. Trust, she repeated, rarely involves unilateral debt. She turned another page, and rarely involves forging access credentials. The room went still. That was when my lawyer, Nathan Cole, stood, He hadn't interrupted once. Not when my sister painted herself as my caretaker. Not when my parents silently validated that version of me. He'd waited until the story felt settled, comfortable. Then he spoke. Your Honor, he said calmly, the plaintiff's case relies on one assumption, that my client ceded control voluntarily. He approached the bench with a slim folder. We don't dispute that Ms. Rowan was under pressure, he continued. We dispute what her sister did with that pressure. He opened the folder. May I proceed? The judge nodded. Nathan held up a printed spreadsheet. This, he said, is a timeline of financial activity tied to Ms. Elena Rowan's business identity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He let the numbers speak. 6 weeks after the business posted its first profitable quarter, new accounts were opened, credit lines expanded, a vehicle lease registered. He turned slightly, all without Ms. Rowan's knowledge. Maribel shook her head. That's not true. Nathan didn't look at her. These actions were authorized using login credentials accessed from a device registered to the plaintiff. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother's hand tightened around my father's arm. Nathan continued. We submitted the digital signatures for review. He handed the judge another document. While the signatures visually resemble Ms. Rowan's, metadata confirms they were executed from an IP address tied to the plaintiff's home. The judge read, silently. Seconds stretched. Maribel's foot began tapping. That's impossible, she said sharply. You're twisting things. Nathan finally looked at her. No, he said quietly. We're following them. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. And there's more, Nathan added. He handed the judge a transcript, recorded communications. He said, messages sent after the business reached profitability. He read aloud. Now that the firm is stable, we should formalize things. Mom and Dad agree it shouldn't all be yours. I already handled the paperwork. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Maribel's face drained of color. That's out of context, she snapped. The judge raised her hand. Sit down. Maribel froze, then did. Nathan produced one final item. A voicemail, he said, left on my client's phone. Maribel stood abruptly. That's private. The judge didn't look up. Play it. The recording filled the room. Maribel's voice, irritated, impatient, unmistakable. Elena, stop pretending this is only yours. You'd still be struggling if I hadn't stepped in. Sign the transfer before this turns into a mess. The silence afterward was absolute. No applause this time. My father stared at the wall. My mother's eyes glassed over. The judge turned off the recording and folded her hands. What concerns this court, she said slowly, is not a business disagreement between siblings. She looked directly at Maribel. It is a pattern of access, pressure, and misrepresentation. Maribel opened her mouth. I'm not finished, the judge said calmly. She turned to me. Ms. Rowan, she asked, you allowed others to speak for you today. Why? The question caught me off guard. Because I said honestly, I wanted the court to hear who they believed I was before hearing who I actually am. The judge nodded once. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Nathan returned to his seat. Maribel no longer looked confident. She looked exposed. And I realized something then, standing there under that steady gaze. I hadn't stayed silent because I was afraid. I'd stayed silent because the truth didn't need defending. It needed room. And now it had it. The judge leaned back in her chair, fingers interlaced, eyes steady on my sister. Ms. Rowan, she said calmly, before I issue a ruling, there's something I need to address. Maribel straightened, smoothing her blazer as if posture alone could restore control. Yes, Your Honor. The judge didn't mirror her politeness. Throughout this hearing, she continued, your argument has relied heavily on portraying the defendant as emotionally unstable and incapable of managing her affairs. She paused. The evidence presented suggests the opposite. The room felt tighter, like the walls had moved in a few inches. It suggests planning. The judge went on. Consistency and restraint. Maribel's jaw clenched. The judge turned to me. Ms. Rowan, she said, I'm going to ask you one final question. I stood. My legs felt steady, not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear no longer had authority over me. Yes, Your Honor. Why? The judge asked, did you exclude your family from your business operations? I inhaled slowly, because every time I tried to include them, I said, they told me I couldn't handle it. Maribel shook her head sharply. That's not true. I didn't look at her. When I worked late nights, I continued, they said I was being dramatic. When I asked for help, they said I was sensitive. When I succeeded quietly, they called it luck. My mother shifted in her seat. Elena, she whispered. I met her eyes for the first time that day. You never asked how I was managing. I said softly. You only asked when it would start paying off. The words landed heavier than I expected. Maribel stood abruptly. This is emotional manipulation, she snapped. She's trying to make herself look like a victim. I turned to her then. No, I said evenly, you're angry because I didn't fail. A ripple moved through the courtroom. Maribel laughed, sharp and brittle. You think this is about failure? She scoffed. You wouldn't even have that business if Aunt Clara hadn't made a mistake. The words hung there, ugly and unfiltered. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Rowan, she said coolly, you will address the court respectfully. Maribel opened her mouth again. Before she could speak, my father stood. Elena, he said, his voice strained. Why are you doing this? Every muscle in my body tensed. Why are you tearing the family apart? I looked at him, the man who had taught me to keep my head down, to smooth things over, to be grateful for scraps of approval. I'm not tearing anything apart. I said, I'm just not holding it together anymore. The judge nodded slowly. That, she said, is an important distinction. Maribel turned to our parents, desperation flashing across her face. Say something, she hissed. You know, I was only helping. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, she didn't rush to defend Maribel. The silence said more than words ever had. The judge straightened. I have heard enough. Maribel spun back toward the bench. Wait, she said quickly. If Elena retains ownership, at least mandate shared oversight for her own protection. The judge didn't hesitate. There is no legal basis for that request. She paused. And given what has been presented today, it would be inappropriate. Maribel's composure cracked completely. You're making a mistake, she said, voice sharp. She can't handle this alone. The judge's tone cooled. No, she replied. I am correcting one. She picked up her pen. In reviewing the evidence, she said, this court finds that the plaintiff has failed to establish any legitimate claim to the defendant's business. Maribel's breath hitched. Furthermore, the judge continued, the misuse of another individual's identity for financial gain raises serious legal concerns. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The judge went on. The court therefore rules that full ownership and operational control remain solely with the defendant, Ms. Elena Rowan. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply stood there, letting the words settle into places that had been braced for disappointment my entire life. And one more thing, the judge added. Maribel looked up sharply. Any further attempts to coerce, misrepresent, or interfere with Ms. Rowan's business may result in additional legal consequences. Silence. Heavy. Final. The gavel struck. Something inside me loosened. Not triumph. Relief. I gathered my bag and stepped away from the table. Maribel didn't look at me. My parents stayed seated, and for the first time in my life, I didn't wait for them. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low conversation. People glanced at me as they passed, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something closer to understanding. Maribel remained inside, shoulders stiff, hands clenched, trapped in the space she tried to control. My mother approached hesitantly. "Elena," she said quietly, "we didn't think it would go this far." I met her gaze. "That's the problem," I replied. "You never do." My father cleared his throat. Maribel was just trying to protect the family. I shook my head. She was protecting her position. Maribel burst through the doors. "So that's it," she snapped. "You win, and we're the villains." I took a breath. "This was never about winning," I said. She scoffed. "Of course it was." "No," I replied. "It was about being heard." The words landed harder than I expected. Maribel looked away first. "We raised you better than this," my mother said, tears brimming. I felt something tighten and then release. "You raised me to stay quiet," I said. "Today I chose not to." No one stopped me as I walked away. Nathan caught up with me near the exit. "You handled that well," he said. "Most people crumble under that pressure." "Thank you," I replied, "for letting the evidence speak." He smiled slightly. The truth usually just needs time. As he walked off, I realized something important. I wasn't leaving behind a family that loved me and failed. I was leaving behind a version of myself that thought love meant endurance. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a dull, final sound. Not dramatic, not loud, just solid. I stood on the steps for a moment longer than necessary, letting the noise of the street settle around me. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life continued at its normal pace, completely indifferent to the fact that something fundamental in me had just shifted. For years, I'd imagined justice as something explosive, raised voices, public shame, a clear winner and loser. What I felt instead was lighter than that, cleaner, like setting something heavy down after carrying it for too long. I didn't go home right away. I walked past the cafe where I used to sit during lunch breaks, wondering if I was falling behind everyone else, past the bus stop where my sister once told me, casually, that I should aim lower so disappointment wouldn't hit so hard. The city hadn't changed. I had. When I finally reached my office, the lights were off, the hallway quiet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it behind me with deliberate care. This space, the small desks, the filing cabinets, the framed certificate I'd earned late one night after work, had never asked me to justify myself. I sat down and let the silence exist without trying to fill it. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down. Not tonight. Some conversations require distance before they can be honest. Others only exist to pull you back into old roles. I had learned the difference. I replayed the day slowly, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Maribel's certainty collapsing. My parents' confusion when authority didn't bend to familiarity. The judge's steady voice cutting through years of assumption with facts alone. What struck me most wasn't my sister's anger. It was how shocked they all seemed when I didn't shrink, as if silence had been my only defining trait, and without it, they didn't recognize me. I stayed late that night, organizing files, reviewing accounts, nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just grounding myself in what was real. Everything was in order. It always had been. I locked up and stepped back into the evening air, feeling something unfamiliar but welcome settle in my chest. Space. Over the next few days, messages came in waves. From my mother, long, emotional paragraphs that circled responsibility without ever quite landing on accountability. From my father, short, practical texts that treated the situation like a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with time. From Maribel, nothing. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. For the first time, she didn't know how to reach me without leverage. A week later, I met Nathan to finalize paperwork. As we stood in the lobby, he asked casually, "Do you feel relieved?" I considered the question. "Yes," I said, "but not because I won." He nodded, waiting, because I continued. I didn't disappear to keep the peace. He smiled slightly. That's usually the real victory. That evening, I returned to my apartment and opened the windows, letting fresh air move through the rooms. I cooked dinner slowly, deliberately, without rushing or multitasking. No one interrupted. No one corrected me. No one needed anything from me. I realized how rare that had been. Growing up, I believed belonging required compliance. That love was something you earned by being easy, agreeable, replaceable. I had confused endurance with loyalty, but endurance without choice isn't love. It's survival, and survival shouldn't be mistaken for virtue. I thought about Maribel, not with anger, but with distance. She might never admit what she'd done. She might tell the story differently, one where she was misunderstood, betrayed, unfairly judged. That was her choice. My responsibility ended where my silence used to begin. Weeks later, I ran into my mother at the grocery store. She looked older, tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. We stood awkwardly between aisles. "I don't recognize you lately," she said quietly. I didn't take the bait. "I recognize myself." I replied. She nodded slowly, as if weighing something she wasn't ready to face. We parted without resolution, and for once, that felt okay. Back at the office, new clients came in. The business continued to grow, steadily, responsibly, without spectacle. No one questioned my capacity. No one needed convincing. I realized something then. The courtroom hadn't given me confidence. It had revealed that I'd already earned it. Late one evening, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I paused at the door. For years, I believed that staying quiet made me safe. But safety built on erasure isn't safety at all. It's just a smaller cage. I don't know what the future holds for my family. Distance, maybe. Boundaries, definitely. What I do know is this. Standing up for myself didn't make me cruel. It didn't make me ungrateful. It didn't make me difficult. It made me honest. And honesty, I've learned, is quieter than anger, but far more powerful than silence. Some people will only value you as long as you stay where they put you. The moment you step out of that place, they'll call it betrayal. Let them. You're not responsible for preserving a version of yourself that was built for someone else's comfort. I didn't leave the courtroom with revenge. I left with something better. My name, my work, my voice, and the certainty that I no longer need permission to exist fully in my own life. That's not an ending. That's where everything finally starts.